Day 901 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently the Russian military sits on 592,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,080 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 3 tanks, 5 APVs, and a whopping 65 artillery, plus 1 air defense system. Then we'll head straight into the map today, as Ukraine's stunning counteroffensives in Kursk and Belgorod are proven to be a major embarrassment to Putin personally. Ukraine has been gaining steam into Russian territory and thereby exposing the Russian army's limitations, so far as lacking maneuverability and a distinct disadvantage when it comes to combined arms warfare, which is to say, lacking in the ability to coordinate the different branches of its military, such as artillery, armor, and air support, which is usually designed to create a cohesive strategy. And now with some map updates, as Ukrainian armored formations have been spotted near the towns of Belitsa, Giri, and Belaya, all of which is southeast to Sudzha, which is close to the original point of incursion. And so for these 3 settlements that I just mentioned, this is all part of the Belovsky district advances, which is a district in Kursk that borders Sumy to its west and the Russian Belgorod Oblast to its southeast. With these photos here taken by locals in Giri, spotting movements of the AFU. So for this region, the likely AFU objective is Belaya. Securing it will give Ukraine control of the main southern approach to Sudzha by road and rail, allowing Belaya to serve as a forward operating base, or a FOB, to check Russian advances. Plus, the high ground just to the north would have some utility for the Ukrainian forces as well, allowing them to effectively control and neutralize any approaching forces from the south and the east. But the immediate gains can already be felt here, as Ukraine has cut off railway from Kursk to Belgorod, which is a route that would normally feed into Belgorod and beyond, supporting the Russian war machine. Then headed west on the map to Sudzha, or beyond Sudzha in fact, as Ukrainian soldiers continue to be spotted north of the town, 5.5 kilometers or about 3.5 miles away. I mean, this is really giving new meaning to those Russian billboards that state, quote, "Russian borders know no bounds." That they do not. Then into the opposite Kursk direction. Oh, and again, avoid the blue, this is far from up to date, because one such update had Ukrainian forces reported to be on the move outside of Semenovka, which is somewhat northeast of other engagements in the Korenovo area. And we also saw some flag replacements, taking down the Russian flag, putting up the Ukrainian one, at Derino on the southern eastern edges of the Kursk front as well. Then headed to Belgorod, where the Ukrainian forces widened operations on Russian territory most recently, with the governor of Belgorod announcing evacuations of the entire Krasnoyaruski district, which borders to Kursk. So the Ukrainian armed forces took control of the village of Poroz, and to the great regret of Russian propagandists, AFU soldiers were seen being extremely kind and considerate to local residents. Even the head of the Russian region, Gladkov, published a video in which the completely unharmed citizens from Poroz said that the armed forces of Ukraine released them to go to their relatives. But then again, the Ukrainian army is a professional army, not a horde like the Russian army. Then moving up the map, but still within Belgorod, as Ukrainian troops have also launched an attack on Russian defenses near Kolotylovka and its checkpoint into the Belgorod region, deploying a tank platoon supported by small assault groups. Border guards and Russian armed forces are currently engaged in battle with the fighting ongoing. And so most of the Russian forces in the Kursk region are simply too far away to assist the developments in the lower Belgorod region, which is making Russian channels a little bit anxious about a new potential breakthrough into the greater Belgorod region by the AFU. The Russian army really does have their work cut out for them. It's not every day that the Ukrainian army crosses the border into Russia, so it wasn't exactly expected by the Kremlin. And then also on the map, and as with any offensive engagements in the region, a Russian T-80 BVM tank was captured in the Sudzha area of the Kursk region. This one will come in handy for the AFU, and it's arguably one of the finest tanks, if not the finest, on offer from Russia. Open source records also indicate that this tank, with the 133 numbering, was getting transported through Russia about 2 months ago. But it appears it's now found a new home with Ukraine. But perhaps the most intriguing thing at the moment is the reported return of the Ukrainian farmers with their tractors. With one such tractor set to break into the Kursk border at full speed to harvest abandoned armored enemy vehicles. Ah, the return of the legendary tractor troops. How we've missed you. Now, moving on the map, because we also continue to see a great deal of newly minted Russian POWs, once again, where some were indeed quite young and were conscripts as well. Putin promised to never let this happen, but it happened anyway. More Russian conscripts. But then in a separate case, other Russian POWs got to feel what it's like to get transported in a modern Western MRAP vehicle. And not just that, but we even started to see some Chechen soldiers of the Russian army become captured and transformed into POWs. Now, Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, or Cousin Kaddy, has previously stated that his Chechen fighters of Akhmat do not surrender. Which is in fact somewhat accurate, but there is nuance, as the Chechen Akhmat fighters are almost always found to be sitting in the rear. But the situation has been developing quite dynamically, and these latest ones got caught off guard and reportedly did not even resist when becoming captured. So what's the Russian military's response to all of these latest updates? Well, they did in fact unleash their most critical countermeasure to date. The banning of the sale of alcohol in various regions of Kursk near to the fighting. What a sad and sorry state of affairs, as an attempted means to keep their soldiers' cognitive faculties intact. But the Russian army has indeed tried the banning of alcohol before in the southern occupied regions of Ukraine, with the outcome being that many Russian soldiers used up all of their time and resources to find or thieve alcohol. I mean, if you tell a Russian soldier he cannot drink vodka, he will just do the opposite. And I'm not saying the Russian army is a bunch of drunks, but at one stage, some Russian soldiers wanted to drink so badly that they took to drinking tile cleaner instead. You see, where there is a will, there is a way. But as for more on the Russian military response, Russia has started building static defenses around the E38 highway, so we'll zoom into that one there, which is just south of the Kursk nuclear power plant. Interestingly, the Kursk nuclear power plant is not in great shape as it already stands, with just one of the 4 reactors active, reactor 4, and with reconstruction on this pre-Chernobyl plant suspended, where work was to be carried out on reactor 2, of course happening as a result of the Ukrainian activity in the region. Now, it's always important to see what the key figures are thinking and feeling. Onto the political vector we go. So, head of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, was still silent on the matter, but did release this photo with the message, quote, "We continue the operation." Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelensky promised a quote-unquote fair response to the Russian regions that attacked Ukraine. Meanwhile, Belarusian President Lukashenko claims that several drones flew from Ukraine into Belarusian airspace, then were shot down, although monitoring groups have denied this claim. On the other hand, Russian attack drones enter Belarusian airspace, fly over it, and then attack Ukrainian lands. Although, out of this most recent bold claim, I can only imagine that Putin touched base with Uncle Luka, given all of these recent events in Kursk, and essentially ordered him to do or say something inflammatory against Ukraine. But what about Putin himself? Well, he'd not made any public appearances or issued any press statements for the past 48 hours until just a moment ago, where a visibly nervous Putin had issued a series of statements regarding his growing catastrophe in the Kursk and Belgorod region. In fact, Putin started to shut down the Kursk governor when he started to speak about the advances in the region, unsettling Putin in the process. With Putin cutting him off to say that, well, best to quote this one, where he says, "Listen, the military department will report to us on the width and depth of the situation. You should talk about the socio-economic situation of your region." Which is a dire situation, no doubt, because of Putin's war of choice. And with this footage we see here, I can't help but be reminded of the footage from the 1936 Olympics, where Hitler was clearly coming down from some illicit substance, shaking or squirming. So it's somewhat easy to draw parallels here. Putin also went on to say that Ukraine was performing their Kursk actions to improve their negotiating position, but then he really lost me when he said, quote, "But what kind of negotiations can we even talk about with people who indiscriminately conduct strikes on our country?" And certainly he'd lose most with a statement like that, because in actuality, he has, again, referred to the typical actions of the Russian military within Ukraine. Although clearly a comment like this was only designed to target his internal audience. But out of it all, we didn't see much in the way of threats, really, if at all. With these statements of his being somewhat tantamount to a tacit acceptance of events right on Russia's doorstep, and even a bit beyond. Meanwhile, he's created a real political doozy of a situation or mess for himself back at home. And then, so to summarize these latest series of incursion events, the latest Ukrainian operations appear to be a significant strategic effort to reset the war's status quo and challenge Russian forces. With Ukraine having 3, maybe 4 options. So first would be to continue to take Kursk territory and beyond until further notice. A second option would be to consolidate and defend seized territory, posing a risk to Russian assets but also carrying high risks for the AFU due to potential overextension and vulnerability to Russian counterattacks, which of course is a risk inherent to the first option as well. The third option would be to perform a partial withdrawal of the Ukrainian troops to more defensible positions. But then to perhaps a fourth option, currently unlikely, which would be a complete withdrawal back to Ukraine as a means to preserve Ukrainian combat forces while sending a strategic message to Russia that Ukrainian maneuver warfare is on the table, forever changing the battlefield dynamics. And yet that message has been sent loud and clear for any of the above options, as the Kremlin now surely understands that they have a brand new, wide open front to consider. But as for any outcome, I think it's fair to say that there are sure to be more surprises ahead. Then on the map, we have to head down to the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, as in true bad loser fashion, and seemingly as a response to the Kursk offensive, Russian elements within the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant have started a large fire in one of the cooling towers, and doing so by burning tires, as reported by a source and done as a means to try and start some kind of international panic. And given the way that it looks, also good to note that radiation levels at the plant are at normal levels and continue to be monitored. So once again, we see Russia performing a combination of direct and indirect nuclear threats depending on the day and the location, but most importantly, depending on how they feel they perceive themselves to be going in this war. I've often likened the Kremlin, and indeed Putin, to being like a 5-year-old child that gets angry when they don't get what they want, and this is no different. Kicking and screaming. And of course, this smoky tire location is a Russian-occupied zone, with any hypothetical nuclear meltdown event, which would spell major disaster for the occupiers in the region as well. Clear Russian empty-handed blackmail attempts. Or perhaps better to say, from 3 days to Kyiv to burning tires in a cooling tower. This is just so embarrassing. How low Russia has fallen in such a short space of time. Oh, and not to mention the power actually generated from the plant is primarily being directed towards the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. Then also on the map, and something a bit lighter perhaps, We also now see that, as of yesterday, the Ukrainian flag is waving proudly at temporarily occupied Kherson in the Kinburn spit. So Russian forces will have to make the trek to that location to switch out the flags in order to attempt to boost morale once more. Then headed across to a 5-second funny to round it all off today, guys. So we'll take a quick look at the state of Russian logistics today with this latest addition, an ancient modified scooter or bike seemingly converted into an e-bike. So this Blyad bike is presumably helping send more than half a dozen anti-tank mines to the front. Now, fair to say, the fuses are not intact, they're not attached, but that's not going to matter all that much if a RPG-7 warhead-equipped FPV drone comes flying in to liberate this unattractive two-wheeler from existence. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment, and once again, thanks for all the support. It really helps keep the channel going, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!